All right. So have you ever just, like, thought about what would happen if entire countries just started disappearing?
Vanishing, like Thanos snapped his fingers kind of thing.
Uh-huh. No, not quite like that. I mean, disappearing because, well, there just aren't enough babies being born anymore.
Ah, the declining birth rate. Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
Right. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but it's a real issue we're facing today. And that's exactly what we're diving deep into the global birth rate decline.
Definitely a topic that deserves a closer look. It's one of those things that might seem kind of abstract, but it has some pretty major implications for, well, pretty much everything.
Exactly. And to guide us through this, we're looking at this article called Global Fertility Crisis. Kind of grabs your attention, right?
Oh, yeah, that title definitely doesn't mince words. Gets right to the point.
It does. And the article doesn't waste any time either. It jumps right in with this crazy stat. Back in 1950, women were having an average of 4.9 children. Can you believe that?
Wow, 4.9. That's a lot of kids. Things have definitely changed since then.
Big time. Today, that number has plummeted to just 2.3, which, believe it or not, is barely enough to keep population stable.
Yeah, that's hovering right around what demographers call the replacement rate.
The replacement rate, I'm going to guess most people listening have no clue what that even means. Can you break it down for us? What's so special about this 2.1 number?
Sure. So the replacement rate is the average number of children each woman needs to have to keep the population size steady, without relying on immigration to boost the numbers. When the rate dips below 2.1, the population starts shrinking.
Okay, so we're barely hanging on then. What happens if we do fall below that 2.1 number? Is it like lights out, game over for a country?
It's not an instant apocalypse or anything, but it does set off a chain of events. Think about it. Fewer young people to enter the workforce, right? That means fewer people contributing taxes that support things like healthcare and pensions.
Yeah, I can see where that would become a problem, especially with the older generations growing larger and living longer.
Exactly. It's like a double whammy. Fewer people paying in and more people needing those services.
Makes sense. And I imagine this whole shrinking workforce thing has got to have some serious economic consequences too.
Oh, absolutely. A smaller workforce means labor shortages, which can make it harder for businesses to, keep up with demand. That can potentially slow down economic growth. Think about it, some industries might even struggle to survive.
It's all connected, isn't it? And it's not just about economics either.
Right. There are social impacts too. You mentioned healthcare and pensions, but there's also the strain on things like education systems. With fewer kids, you might see schools closing or resources getting stretched thin.
So we're talking about a ripple effect across, well, pretty much every aspect of society. And the article points out that this isn't just a problem in, say, Europe or North America. It's happening globally. Even
Mm.
China, with its huge population, is actually shrinking.
It's true. The article mentions China is losing a staggering 400,000 people each year because of this decline.
400,000 every year. That's like a whole city disappearing annually.
It is pretty mind-boggling, isn't it? And it highlights how widespread this trend really is. It's happening in Asia, Africa, Latin America, across the board.
So what's going on here? Why are birth rates falling in such diverse cultures all over the world?
Well, there's no single answer, but there are some common factors we see popping up again and again.
Like what?
Well, one big thing is access to education and contraception, particularly for women. When women have more control over their reproductive choices, they tend to have fewer children.
That makes sense. I mean, it gives them more options in terms of like career paths and personal goals.
Exactly. And another factor is the rising cost of living, especially in urban areas. Raising kids these days is expensive. Housing, healthcare, education, all that adds up. For many people, it's just not financially feasible to have a large family.
Especially if both parents need to work just to make ends meet.
Hmm.
So it's like this combination of economic pressures and changing social values.
Right. People are prioritizing different things now: career advancement, personal fulfillment, travel, you name it. Kids just aren't always at the top of the list anymore.
So how do we fix this? I mean, the article throws out a few potential solutions, automation and immigration, but are those really realistic answers?
Well, they can be part of the solution for sure. Automation can help fill those gaps in the workforce, but it doesn't address the underlying issue of a shrinking tax base.
Right, like robots don't pay taxes.
Exactly. And while immigration can bring in younger workers, it needs to be managed carefully to ensure, social cohesion and avoid unintended consequences.
It's a complex issue, no doubt. And to be honest, focusing on those solutions feels like we're just, like, putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem.
I see what you mean. It's like we're addressing the symptoms, not the root cause. And the article actually argues for a more fundamental shift.
Oh, like what?
Well, it talks about changing how we value families and how we support parents, especially those who choose to stay at home.
Interesting. You mean like providing more financial support for families with young children?
Exactly. Things like making childcare more affordable, offering tax breaks for families, or providing paid parental leave. It's about making it easier for people to actually raise children if they want to.
It's a pretty bold idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if those things are so crucial, what does that say about our current values as a society? Do you think this kind of cultural shift is even possible?
It's definitely a challenge. I mean, changing deeply ingrained societal norms doesn't happen overnight. But it's interesting to look at countries with, like, really robust social safety nets and family-friendly policies. They tend to have higher birth rates.
Huh. So there's some evidence to suggest it could work.
Potentially. It seems like when people feel supported and have the resources they need, they're more likely to consider having children. So the question becomes, are we, as a society, willing to make those investments?
It's a tough question, but an important one. And this whole conversation about birth rates, it's way more complex than I think most people realize. It's not just about numbers. It's about economics, social structures, personal choices, you know, even how we define success as a society. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And the article does a great job of highlighting those interconnected layers. It makes you think about the kind of future we're creating and what kind of world we want to leave for, well, for those future generations, if there are enough of them.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dives today. This article definitely gives us a lot to ponder. It even encourages readers to, join the conversation and share their thoughts.
Always a good idea to keep the dialogue going.
Absolutely. But I want to leave our listeners with something specific to chew on. If you could design just one policy or initiative to address this issue, what would it be? No right or wrong answers here, just something to consider as you go about your day.
A great question to ponder. Food for thought.
Until next time.